Hey, welcome. My name is Adam, and in this video, I'm going to be guiding you through a very interesting and profound journey into one of the most mind-bending topics that exists. And that is why mystical thinking makes logical sense. In this video, we're going to be exploring mystical ideas like that the universe is all one, or that the universe is made of consciousness, or ideas like law of attraction. We're going to be exploring these esoteric, new agey kind of ideas, but we're going to be exploring why these ideas actually make logical sense, and actually why mystical thinking is the most reasonable and rational way to understand reality. Now, mysticism has gotten a very bad rap over the last 200 years, and one of the biggest problems that I see in today's society, or just in general, is that scientific, atheistically, rationally minded people will lump mystical ideas into the same category as religious dogma. This is what Ken Wilber called the pre-trans fallacy, and this is one of the most important ideas that we will discuss in this video. The pre-trans fallacy comes from the understanding that human beings go through predictable stages of psychological development. We go from pre-rational to rational to trans-rational, from pre-verbal to verbal to trans-verbal. We go from pre-conventional to conventional to trans-conventional. And this is empirically validated by developmental psychology. And the main mistake that rational people make is they confuse the pre for the trans, because pre-rational ideas and trans-rational ideas share the same quality, that both of them are irrational. The difference between a pre-rational idea, like for example a childish, religious, blind belief in the creation story, for example, that God is sitting up in the clouds and he created the earth in 7 days. The person who blindly believes this is in the pre-rational stage of development, and they don't even have access to third-person rational understanding. They don't have that kind of ability to self-reflect and really question their beliefs. They don't think, well, that's not very scientific to think that God created the earth 6,000 years ago in 7 days, because we have fossil evidence that dates back to billions of years ago. So that's not very scientific. So what rationally minded people will see the pre-rationalists, they'll see the religious folk, and they'll see how childish and unreasonable they are and how often they get stuck in their ways of thinking, and they'll confuse those people for trans-rational thinkers who have actually gone through rationality and taken rationality to its end point, where it actually kind of breaks and turns into trans-rationality. And the difference is that trans-rationality still has access to logical, rational thinking, but we kind of revisit spirituality. We revisit ideas like God and consciousness and the nature of reality, but these ideas are revisited from a higher elevation. And these ideas are revisited in a rational way. So mysticism really is like the rational investigation into what the nature of reality is until we actually break into trans-rationality. The main reason why this pre-trans fallacy is such a big problem is because it prevents science from actually doing an honest investigation into the nature of reality. Modern science leaves out entire domains of life, like psychedelic consciousness, non-ordinary states of consciousness, what consciousness is, where it comes from, how it works, paranormal phenomena as well. There is tons of evidence that suggests that these things actually exist, but science doesn't want to accept that. If I, let's say, wrote a paper in one of the universities in like Harvard, if I wrote a paper in Harvard describing why it's possible to channel fifth dimensional entities and to actually make a spiritual link with entities that exist on higher realms of consciousness, and how I can actually channel their insights into a book, like what happened with the books The Law of One. If I wrote a paper and published it in Harvard, let's say I was a professor, I would probably lose my job. So there's this kind of stigma against any ideas that even appear spiritual, or any ideas that appear esoteric in any sense are kind of thrown away. They're not allowed. Now, the reason why this is actually goes way back to the 1700s during the Enlightenment, which was a very big shift in the value system of Western society. In spiral dynamics terms, we were making a shift from stage blue into stage orange. So if you don't know what that means, stage blue is very traditional, religious-minded, dogmatic, where church and state are one. You have to follow the Bible. You have to subscribe to the beliefs of the church. Otherwise, you're not a part of the society, and you're liable to be crucified or burned at the stake or anything like that. So in the 1700s, in the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, was when the values were shifting away from religious thinking and more towards scientific thinking and more towards individual liberty and individual rights and free thinking. And this was a very positive thing, except for that the Enlightenment thinkers kind of caused a very big issue in their philosophy, where we saw all of the terrible horrors that religion had caused over the last 1,000 years. We saw the Crusades, the Spanish Inquisition, the witch hunts, and the stifling of individual mental expansion. The church caused a lot of issues, but what happened was the Enlightenment thinkers threw out all of spirituality. They said, no more God. Anything having to do with God, we're going to throw it out. And what they did was they threw the baby out with the bathwater. Where, yes, the infantile pre-rational versions of religion are very problematic and should be transcended, but there's also very genuine, mystical, trans-rational experiences that a human being can experience, and those are actually very valuable. These trans-rational, mystical union experiences provide a very deep sense of meaning to one's life. They make one feel spiritually connected to life. They give someone a deep sense of purpose. And they can even just help to explain the actual nature of reality. So in the 1700s, we threw the baby out with the bathwater, and ever since then, we've kind of outlawed all religious thinking from our philosophical discussions in academia and so forth. And this caused a big issue. Now, we're still kind of paying the consequences for this because it's been so thoroughly indoctrinated into our minds in the West that reality is scientific, reality is materialistic, reality is rational. And if you claim to have some kind of mystical experience or mystical ideas about the unity with God, that doesn't fly. You must just be childish. You must be stupid. You must not be smart enough to use rationality. So right now, I'm going to put on the screen an extremely important diagram, which I'm going to explain what this means. This is a rainbow arc that shows the development of the human psyche. And if you know about spiral dynamics, I'll put the spiral dynamics colors. So every single word here, impulsive, opportunist, diplomat, expert, achiever, pluralist, strategist, magician, unitive, those are all stages of human psychological development as studied by Suzanne Cook-Greuter. And these stages of psychological development have been proven by many different psychologists, and this is just one of, I think, one of the most clearer models of human development. What is being shown here is that the human being is moving from unconscious union to conscious union. So we're moving from pre-rational union with reality to trans-rational union with reality. At the peak of this rainbow, at the top of the curve where it says achiever and pluralist, this shows the peak of the ego structure. This shows the full, complete development of the rational adult mind. This is where Western society is trying to get you in the schooling process. If school gets you up to the achiever level of consciousness, then it has done its job. It has made you a functioning member of society. This achiever consciousness is characterized by having the maximum subject-object differentiation, where I am an individual that is completely separate from the world. The world is a material sandbox, and I am a material person, and I am just a human that's in the world. I'm an individual. I have my own thoughts and ideas. So the peak here is like the peak of rationality. The achiever stage is like the peak of rational thinking. But as we continue development, the trend that always happens every single time in the human being's developmental journey is that eventually they will transcend rationality and slowly, gradually begin to deconstruct rationality as we move into trans-rationality, where we start to realize relativism. We start to realize the union of subject and object. We start to realize that, hey, I can't just study reality objectively. I can't just think that reality is material, because, as we're going to be exploring, the latest findings in science show that the subject and the object are actually one, and that they're interconnected, and that you can't really observe reality objectively without being a subject, without bringing in your personal worldview. So this is relativism. And as we continue this journey of ego development, which I'm going to be making an entire series about, so stay tuned for that. As we continue this journey of ego development, we end up at the unitive stage, which is not the end, but it's the lative stage that we have actual scientific data for, which is extremely mystical. It's extremely, extremely mystical, to the eyes of an achiever, the unitive person would look like a religious nuthead, but really they're an extremely developed and conscious human being. All right. So one way that you can phrase this is that you have to become somebody before you can be nobody. You have to build an ego before you can transcend the ego. A very important idea. Okay, so let's look at how stage orange, or the achiever, actually moves into stage green, or the pluralist, where we're actually going to be looking into the very core of logic itself. And we're going to be looking into the very core of science itself, and we're going to see how this idea of the material reality that's scientific and that follows logical rules like the laws of physics, we're going to see how this whole thing actually isn't an accurate view of reality. And actually, in the same way that the religious person has a childish view of reality, that they think that everything came from the God sitting in the clouds creating the earth in 7 days, in the same, not in the same way, but in a slightly more advanced way, the scientifically minded person still has a childish view of reality. It's a cartoon caricature of how reality actually works. So I'm not saying that scientifically minded people make the same mistakes as religiously minded people. They're a higher stage, they're a later stage of development, they're more advanced, they have higher capacity for rationality, but they're still not at the end. In the same way, you could say the view, in my personal life, my view was very religious. When I was 7 or 8 years old, I went to a Catholic school. But as I got older and I became 11, 12, 13, and my brain continued developing and my psyche developed into the achiever stage, I became more atheistic and scientific and rationalistic. But when I was 12 or 13, I still didn't have all of reality figured out. I still had a very cartoon caricature of what reason and what logic actually are and what science is. I had no clue what those things are. Not that I'm saying that I have it all figured out now, but I'm definitely a little bit further along the rainbow. So let's look into this idea. Logic, when taken to its ultimate conclusion, ends up breaking itself. So really, if we want to really be logical and rational, then we would actually have to question logic itself. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing here. In 1931, there was a mathematician that went by the name of Kurt Gödel. And through this mathematical proof that he did, he ended up blowing a hole into the entire foundation of mathematics. So the context here is that in the early 1900s, the logical positivists, it was a very popular way to view reality, where basically we wanted to make reality formal. We wanted to boil all of existence down into a formula. We wanted to really to make reality logical, to remove all paradox, all strange loopiness. We wanted to make reality into a logical system, basically. And we wanted to ground all of reality into mathematics. So the mathematicians Bertrand Russell and Whitehead, they created this system that basically tried to boil all of reality down into symbols, down into math. And it worked. Some people thought that it worked, but Kurt Gödel, he proved that it was actually impossible for any system of symbols to fully encapsulate reality. So Kurt Gödel actually created a logical proof using Whitehead and Bertrand Russell's system within their own system. He actually created a very complex proof that logically proved that their system was incomplete. It was not a complete description of reality. And he also proved that it is logically impossible for any system of symbols, so for any system of rationality at all, it is logically impossible for any system to fully encapsulate reality, because every system is necessarily incomplete. This was Gödel's incompleteness theorem. And the core reason why is because any system of numbers, let's say logic, of math, let's say, any system cannot explain itself. It can explain reality, but it can't explain itself. And it itself is a part of reality. Therefore, it can never be complete. This is the famous self-reference problem. Because if you want a complete system, it has to explain all of reality. But no system can explain itself in the same way that your hand can't grab onto itself. Or in Zen Buddhism, in mysticism, the same reason why the truth of reality, the truth of experience, why the mind can't grasp its own nature. Why you can't use the mind, you can't use ideas and words and logic and symbols to explain the mind. The mind can't explain the mind because it is itself. It's like the hand trying to grab onto itself. It's impossible. It doesn't work. So any mental formulation of reality that you have in your mind, any belief system or metaphysics or philosophy or ideology that you have about how you think reality works, necessarily is wrong. It's incomplete. Reality is, by definition, not what you think of reality. Because what you think of reality is just a symbol. If you really go into the nature of language, what is language? Language is just sounds that represent parts of reality. It's a map that represents the territory of actual reality. But the map is not the territory. The map of reality isn't actual reality itself. It's just a symbol. So if you see a picture of an apple, you might think, oh, that's an apple. But no, it's not an apple. It's a picture of an apple. And many people don't understand this when it comes to their worldview. They think that they have reality all figured out in their mind, in their formulas, in their systems of science. They think they have actual reality, but they don't realize they just have a picture of reality. It isn't reality itself. And when you go to eat the picture of the apple, it tastes like paper. In the same way where a math formula isn't the same as swimming in the ocean. It's not the same thing. They're different. Whatever model you have of reality is not reality. So that kind of opens the door to mysticism, because we're actually breaking logic, because we're kind of realizing that logic itself is an insufficient modality for understanding the nature of reality. We need to use a different modality. We can't only use the mind to interface with reality. We have to use something else. And what that is mysticism, which is, we're going to get into what mysticism is, but it's being, it's interfacing with reality directly, experiencing reality, learning about reality through experience as opposed to through models. Let's talk about the quantum revolution. So around the same time that Kurt Gödel blew a hole in logic and mathematics, the quantum revolution blew a hole, a giant crater, into traditional science. So the quantum revolution was basically kicked off by Einstein's theory of general relativity, and one of the main ideas in this revolution was the unity of the subject and the object, where we actually realized that the subject, the person, of the observer, the scientist, actually affects the results of the object, the results of their experiments. And the best way to describe this was with the double slit experiment. So I'm going to leave a link in the description that goes into, very simply explains what the double slit experiment is. Here's a video of me explaining what the double slit experiment was and why it was so profound. 100 years ago, there was a revolution in science called the quantum revolution, and scientists were wondering, is light a particle or is it a wave? And this was very important to understand, because if we want to learn how to harness the power of light, we need to know what it is first. So many of the scientists were doing experiments, and they were getting undoubtable results that light is definitely a wave. And then other scientists were doing experiments and they were getting undoubtable results that light is definitely a particle. So this was weird, because it was like, which one is it? Is it a wave or is it a particle? Now there was this experiment called the double slit experiment, where basically the scientists were shooting a photon through this little slit, right? So this is the photon here, and they were shooting it through a little slit, and it would hit up against a board and make a mark. Now, sometimes when they shot the photon, it would make a wave pattern, but other times it would just make a dot pattern. And they found that when they were observing the experiment, when they were actually looking at the experiment, they got a dot. But when they were looking away, or when they went into a different room and then they ran the experiment, they got a wave. So this was really weird. This had never happened before in human history. How does me observing what's happening affect the actual results of the experiment? So they're like, okay, this is really weird. Let's set up a camera. So what they did was they set up a camera somewhere in the room to videotape. Okay, so like we're gonna see, why is it that when we leave the room we get a different result? So they set up a camera, and they found that when the camera was switched on and they were observing the experiment, they got a dot. But when the camera was switched off and they weren't observing, they got a wave. And they were like, okay, this is really creepy and getting a little bit spooky. So let's try putting in some kind of measuring device. Maybe they thought that the electromagnetism of the camera is affecting the experiment. So they put in a measuring device that basically just measured the photon right when it exited the shooting device. They measured like how the photon is going to land and hit the paper, basically. So this measuring device, they set it up in a way so that it would not affect the photon at all. So when the measuring device was turned on, they noticed that they got a dot. And then when they turned the measuring device off and they weren't measuring, they got a wave. So this double slit experiment really blew a freaking crater in the entire foundations of science, because we discovered undoubtedly that just the process of observing the experiment actually changed the results of the experiment. So before we thought that we can do an experiment and we can observe it and then we can just get the actual truth. But now we were discovering that the actual truth changes based on whether or not I'm observing. So this was really weird. And one of the main lessons that we learned from this is that the subjective observer, the subject, and the object are actually entangled. And that the observer actually affects the object that is being observed. So we discovered that the subject and the object are entangled and they're intertwined. And I wanted to read to you what Erwin Schrödinger, one of the fathers of quantum mechanics, what he has to say about this. Erwin Schrödinger and many of the scientists that were very active during the quantum revolution, many of them were very mystical thinkers. And their work in science actually turned them into mystics. So this is what Schrödinger has to say about the results of the double slit experiment. So from the theory as explained before, from the unavoidable and unsurveyable interference of measuring devices with the object under observation, lofty consequences of an epistemological nature have been drawn and brought to the fore, concerning the relation between subject and object. It is maintained that recent discoveries in physics have pushed forward to the mysterious boundary between the subject and the object. This boundary, so we are told, is not a sharp boundary at all. We are given to understand that we never observe an object without its being modified or tinged by our own activity in observing it. We are given to understand that under the impact of our refined methods of observation and of thinking about the results of our experiments, that mysterious boundary between the subject and object has broken down. And then he goes on to explain why he doesn't really like that interpretation of the subject and object breaking down, and instead he prefers this interpretation. He says, the same elements compose my mind and the world. This situation is the same for every mind and its world, in spite of the unfathomable abundance of cross-references between them. The world is given to me only once, not one existing and one perceived. Subject and object are only one. The barrier between them cannot be said to have broken down as a result of recent experience in the physical sciences, for this barrier does not exist. So that was Erwin Schrödinger talking about how subject and object are one. And he's saying there is no mental perception of reality, and then there's an actual physical reality that's being perceived. He says, reality is given to me only once. There's only perception. There's no object. The perception itself is the object. Mind and matter are one. That was how science proved that the subject and object are one, and that breaks us into mystical thinking. This book here, Quantum Questions by Ken Wilber, goes into it's just a collection of mystical writings by the world's greatest physicists. And he doesn't, chop up all of their writings to kind of make it seem as if they were mystics. He takes long passages from their books without chopping them up, and it's obvious that these guys were mystical thinkers. They were deeply contemplative into the nature of reality, and guys like Schrodinger were into Advaita Vedanta and were actually starting to explore spirituality deeper as a result of their experience in breaking down the boundary of subject and object scientifically. Now let's talk about the left brain versus the right brain. What I've discovered is that if we actually use the left brain properly, we can break into the right brain and actually open the heart. So the mind, when used properly, logic, when used properly, can actually serve to open up the heart, which is what I'm trying to do here in this video. So let's talk about the left brain versus the right brain. This could be seen as the logical brain versus the artistic brain. The formal reasoning brain versus the intuitive brain. The explicit understanding versus the implicit understanding. The masculine versus the feminine. The part mind versus the holistic mind. Now, no side of the brain is better than the other side. I'm not saying like, oh, the right brain is better. No, both of them need to be included and integrated. And the problem with Western culture and many atheistic, scientifically minded people is they're too left-brained. They have a left brain bias where they think that reality should follow logical step-by-step sequences. They think that reality should be explained explicitly in some kind of formula. They think that reality is causal and every cause has its effect. So left brain thinking is imagined as A causes B, which then causes C, and it's linear. This is linear causation. Whereas right brain just sees A, B, and C all at once. There's no order to them. They're just all there. They all cause each other, or it's self-caused. Now, the mystic actually combines the left brain and the right brain. They don't only go deep into the right brain, or don't only go deep into the left brain, but when these two sides of your psyche kind of come into unity, then that's when we really move into higher levels of ego development, and that's where we really start gaining deep, genuine understanding of the nature of reality. We need to balance these sides of ourselves. Have you ever wondered, why is it so difficult to make artificial intelligence? This might sound like kind of an oddball out of left field, but really think about it. We're having a lot of trouble making an actual intelligence that thinks like a human being. Now, we've seen some progress in AI art. There's a lot of AI that's going on in, social media algorithms, and all sorts of companies, even the military, they use AI technology. But there's really a difference between artificial intelligence and human intelligence. Artificial intelligence is very mechanical, it's very computery, whereas human intelligence is a work of art. It's on a completely different level. Artificial intelligence is a piece of code, whereas human intelligence learns by itself. It learns automatically. It doesn't have to be coded to learn. Learning and intelligence is the nature of awareness. The nature of the human being is intelligence. Let's talk about one definition of intelligence. There's many different ways to define intelligence, but any intelligent entity, according to Douglas Hofstadter in his book Gödel Escherbach, any intelligent entity needs to be able to respond to situations very flexibly. They need to be able to take advantage of fortuitous circumstances. They need to be able to make sense out of ambiguous or contradictory messages. They need to be able to recognize the relative importance of different elements of a situation. They need to be able to find similarities between situations despite the differences that may separate them. So you ever have that test when you're going to check out somewhere where it's like, I am not a robot test, the reCAPTCHA, and they ask you to click on click on all the pictures that have a dog, and they're like slightly blurry, and because human intelligence is the only intelligence that's able to recognize what a dog is across all these different contexts. So we're able to recognize similarities despite apparent differences, and we're able to recognize differences despite apparent similarities. Also, intelligence needs to be able to synthesize new concepts by taking old concepts and putting them together in new ways, which is kind of what's happening here in this video. And also, we need to be able to come up with new ideas that are novel. Now, artificial intelligence does seem to be able to do this, like when we're making a picture, like with Midjourney. I'll put on the screen some of my Midjourney creations. All I did was just type in a prompt into the AI, and it just magically generated these pictures from scratch based on, I think, a large database of ideas. But at the end of the day, this artificial intelligence needed to be programmed by someone. And really, the big question is it possible to program intelligence? Can we, because what is programming? Programming is a form of logic. It's a language. So can we systematize intelligence? Is that even possible? It might be. Some of the leading thinkers in AI, I'll put a link in the description of an amazing podcast. They think that they're getting very close. And I don't know if it's possible or not. I'm not going to make any claims, but if you really think about what a piece of code is it's an explicit system. Whereas human understanding understands things implicitly without it having to be spelled out. So for example, when I tell you a joke, like two blonde girls walk into a bar, you would have thought one of them would have seen it. So that's a joke, and you may have found it funny or not, but the point is that whether you get it or not is implicit. I don't have to explain why the joke is funny, if it was funny at all. But when we're making something explicit, we need to kind of spell it out. So, for example, in this video, many people already feel in their heart like mystical thinking makes logical sense, and it's the best way to explain reality. They feel it implicitly, but I'm kind of breaking it into explicit parts. I'm proving it explicitly. We're really going into all the details. And there's value to both implicit and explicit thinking. And an interesting question is, how can we explicitly explain intuition or intelligence? We're going to explore that a bit more. But first, let's talk about what does it mean for something to be logical? What is logic? I get the feeling that many people who claim to be logical thinkers have never really asked themselves the question, what actually is logic? They've never done meta-logic. They've just done logic. So when I was 10 years old, this was when I was starting to move into stage orange. I was starting to be more rational. And I remember the teacher handed out name tags to everyone, and we had to write some of our favorite things on the name tag. We had to write our favorite vacation destination, our favorite food, and our top value in life. And I remember when I was 10 years old, I wrote logic was my top value in life. And I think that's very interesting because I'm so passionate about logic that I'm interested in doing meta logic. What actually is logic? And how does logic work? Many people don't do this. But it doesn't make any logical sense to use logic to prove your points if you don't even know what logic is. That makes no logical sense at all. And there is no logical reason why logic would be the best way to explain reality. What if there's a different way to explain reality which has nothing to do with reason or logic? What if you could understand reality without involving logic at all? But you would have to involve logic because logic is a part of reality. So in my quest to understand what logic is, I played the dictionary game. And what we're going to do is we're going to play the dictionary game right now is we're going to go into the Merriam-Webster dictionary and we're going to Google for the definition of words, only to discover that all of these definitions are self-referential. And they all reference each other in their own definitions, and they kind of circle back onto each other and loop onto each other until we're just using other words to explain words, but we're not really ever understanding the essence of what the thing actually is. All right, everyone, welcome to my favorite game, which is called Search in the Dictionary to try and understand what reality is, only to realize that all of the definitions that you find all are defined in terms of each other, and all the words are explained using other words, which are explained using other words, which eventually kind of loops back onto itself, explaining words with itself. So that's what the game is called. And we're going to see how when we actually look up the definitions of basic words like logic, and we just click around long enough, eventually we'll find that everything is explained in terms of itself. So logic, okay, the science that deals with principles and criteria of validity of inference and demonstration. The science of the formal principles of reasoning. So we're looking at, like, how do we know if an inference that we made is valid? So what is an inference? An inference is something that is inferred, okay, based on the facts or the evidence. So we have facts and then we infer what that means. So, but my question was, what is reasoning? So the science of the formal principles of reasoning. Okay, what is reasoning? The use of reason. Okay, so what is reason? A statement offered an explanation or justification, a rational ground or motive. Okay, so what is rational? It's kind of interesting. Having reason or understanding. Okay, thank you. Okay, so another question here is what is truth? Truth, the body of real things, events and facts, actuality. Okay, a fact. What is a fact? Something that has actual existence. So we're back on actuality. Okay, so what is actuality? The quality or state of being actual. Okay, so what is actual? Existing in fact or in reality. All right, so what is reality? That's a great question. What is reality? The quality or state of being real. Okay, so what is real? Having objective, independent existence. Wow, that is very interesting to actually contemplate. So what does it mean for something to be objective? Objective. So expressing or dealing with facts or conditions as perceived without distortion by personal feelings, prejudice, or interpretations. But wait a second, didn't Schrödinger just prove that there is no reality independent of the mind? How can something exist without it being in the mind? Isn't the mind the fundamental nature of reality. So we can go on and on. We can look at mind, and we're just kind of looking to see this kind of game that's being played with any system. It's self-contained in itself, but really it kind of ends up breaking when you go too deeply into it. Really think about it. How many people have actually looked up the definition of reason? How many people use reason every single day to make decisions, but they've never bothered to look up the definition for what reason means? Let's talk about rationalization. This is a very interesting phenomenon. So you might be thinking that Adam is using rationality to justify his belief in mysticism. Adam just loves mystical ideas, and it makes him feel good to have a logical reason for why he's not crazy, basically. Tons of people do this. Every single human being is constantly rationalizing their actions and beliefs to themselves. Constantly. In fact, you can think the human being is like a rider that's on an elephant. I got this analogy from Jonathan Haidt. A human being is like a rider on an elephant. The elephant is what actually drives your life, and that represents your emotions. And then the rider is like your conscious mind that makes rational explanations for why the elephant is doing what it's doing. So at the end of the day, the rider has no control, or very 1% control over where the elephant goes. But if the elephant sees a peanut and is hungry, the elephant is going to go get that peanut. And then what the rider's job, the conscious mind, what its job is to do is to rationalize to itself that it was actually in control the whole time. So the rider will tell the elephant to go left, but then the elephant will see that there's a peanut laying on the road to the right, and then the elephant will ignore the rider and go straight to go eat the peanut. And then the rider will have to justify why the elephant went there because the rider is in control, right? Your whole life is rational and logical. Everything you do makes sense, right? So you justify to yourself why the elephant went right. Say, oh, you know what? I wanted to go right anyways. You know what? I like right better than left. I think I meant to go right the whole time. So the other day, this was 2 days ago, or yesterday, I came home from a walk, and it was later at night. It was like 8 p.m. It was too late for me to eat, but I felt very hungry. And I told myself I wouldn't eat after dinner, but I was just so hungry that I come home, I still had leftovers on the counter, and all of a sudden I started telling myself, well, what would be the harm in eating this food? Food is good for me, after all. I like food. And plus, I've been working out more at the gym, and I need more calories to build my muscle. And also, this is healthy food. Anyway, so there would be no harm in eating it at this time. So I rationalized to myself why I should eat this food. And then I ate it. And then immediately after, my stomach started hurting because I just ate at the wrong time. I was already digesting dinner, and then I ate again, and my stomach started hurting, and then I had to go to bed, and it was a mess. So my rational mind knew not to eat. But the elephant really wanted some food. So the rational mind had to, the elephant was going to get food anyways. So the rational mind kind of made up a reason for why it's okay for the elephant to eat some food right now. And it ended up being the wrong decision. So now I know for next time, not a big deal. But that's just a funny explanation of how we rationalize things to ourselves. And we don't just use rationality to explain simple things. We use rationality to explain any belief system is rational to the person that believes it. So conspiracy theorists who believe in totally ungrounded things that really make no sense if you think about it for longer than 10 minutes. Like that the government is run by evil Satan worshippers that eat babies. And it's only the left-wingers, of course. Someone who holds this worldview has all kinds of rational evidence and facts and statistics and stories and studies for why their belief is true. Even if these facts and evidence or stories are completely fabricated, the capacity for the human mind to rationalize any crazy belief to itself is infinite. The human capacity for self-justification is infinite. You can become infinitely self-deceived in any worldview because no person wants to think of themselves as being crazy. No person thinks that their worldview is wrong because your worldview is very important for your survival. It helps you make sense of what's going on around you. You need it. It forms part of your identity. It helps you to relate to your friends who have the same worldview as you. So if your worldview is questioned or there's giant gaping logical holes in your worldview, that's not very comfortable for you, and you're going to do everything you can to kind of cover up those holes. Like in The Wizard of Oz, don't look behind the curtain. There's nothing to see here. But meanwhile, you pull behind the curtain, there's a guy, creating some whole illusion, and it's completely made up, completely fabricated. What's funny is if you think that your worldview is logical or it makes logical sense, so many rationalists will think that their belief in the 3D physical reality, their belief in science, their belief in reductionism and materialism and the scientific method and evolution, they think these beliefs are rational. Now, I'm not saying whether they are rational or not, but some of them are, some of them less so. But you tell yourself that your beliefs, the reason why you have your beliefs are for some kind of rational reason. You think that you thought out your worldview. You think that your worldview was like chosen consciously by you, not realizing that your worldview was just completely indoctrinated into you from your culture. And that the reason why you believe in evolution and science and rationality is actually for an emotional reason. The elephant needs that belief system to make sense of the world and to relate to your friends and to appear as intelligent and to write papers in your university and to be credible, to be respected, to be seen as a good thinker. You need this worldview for an emotional reason. Not because it is logical. Again, I'll say it again. It makes no logical sense why you should believe in logic. Why would logic be the best way to explain reality? If you use logic to prove why logic is the best way to explain reality, then how would you explain the logic that you just used to explain it? You would need a meta-logic to explain your logic. But then how would you explain your meta-logic? You would need a meta-meta-logic. And then you would need a meta-meta-meta-logic to explain your meta-meta-logic. So you can't use logic to explain why logic is the best way to think of reality. What you can use, though, and what you've probably done if you're a rationalist or atheist, is you've used rationalization, where you subscribe to a worldview, the one that makes the most sense to you, and then you rationalize it after the fact, the one that feels the best to you. You're not actually using logic to figure out what reality is. You're just going by your feelings. You have a deep feeling that reality should be rational and reasonable. And I can totally relate. I have that feeling too. But I've taken that feeling deeper and deeper and deeper into started self-referencing and questioning and deconstructing, where I'm realizing all the stuff that we're talking about here in this video, realizing the limits of logic. Keep in mind that some of the best reasoning is actually made from intuitive leaps. So like Albert Einstein, for example, he discovered special relativity just by some hunch. It was just an intuitive hunch. In his mind, he was doing a visual thought experiment. He used his imagination to create the special theory of relativity and also the general theory of relativity as well. And this came from an intuitive leap in knowing, a spontaneous aha moment. He didn't necessarily logic his way to general relativity. It just kind of came to him. Obviously, he did a lot of work and contemplation and thinking, but the actual moment when you have a spontaneous insight, a spontaneous breakthrough into the nature of reality, it's not done so explicitly by following a 1, 2, 3 step formula. It's done so implicitly. There's just a point where you just get it. Something happens. All of your experiences kind of all come together up until this point in your life where all of a sudden it just comes to you all at once. And after it all comes to you, it seems so obvious and so logical when we go to prove Einstein's general relativity. Yeah, it seems pretty obvious. But it's not obvious. All right, so we're going to take a quick break and we're going to come back with what is mystical thinking. All right, we're back. So we've gone deeply into exploring the limits of logic and rationality. And the point of this is to kind of show you that logic is not the only way to understand reality. When we take logic to the end, it breaks. The mind kind of gives up. The mind stops trying to understand reality logically, and it kind of throws its hands up in the air. And when the mind gives up, what's left over? That's what we're going to be talking about right now. So what is mystical thinking? So here's some qualities of mystical thinking that I just brainstormed. So mystical thinking has a very deep desire for the truth and for understanding the whole of reality. Really, we're looking into deep existential questions like, what is me? What am I? What is reality? What is consciousness? Why is there something rather than nothing at all? Why does reality exist? What is God? And how does reality work? These kinds of questions. And mysticism generally likes to use direct investigation into the nature of experience itself. So what we've done in the first half of this video is we've broken all of the maps apart. We've tried to kind of show that all of these maps of logic and rationality and science, they're like a house of cards, kind of like the dictionary definitions, where they all reference each other and they seem to make sense on the surface, but when you start digging a little bit deeper into it, it turns into a self-referential mess and it just implodes on itself. which is what Kurt Gödel proved and we proved with the quantum mechanics explanation, etc. So we're trying to get the mind to just give up by actually showing you scientifically that the mind is not all there is. It's not the only way to understand reality. There's another way. And the other way is actually just reality. It's through experience. It's through empiricism. So science has kind of gone very far away from its original roots. The original roots of science is empiricism, trying to understand reality through experiments, through seeing what reality is. I'm not going to guess what reality is, but I actually need to do an experiment. I need to prove it. I need to actually see it for myself. That's the spirit of science. However, most scientists today have not proven most of the things that they actually work on. They just kind of take the proofs from the people that came before them and they just build on top of those. And they're not really open to the possibility that a human being can actually understand reality irrationally, meaning without rationality. You can understand reality with a quiet mind. You don't have to be thinking about reality in order to get deep, penetrating insights into the nature of reality. Your awareness learns just through observation. If you've ever done some deep meditation, or even if you've just like observed, for example, a ladybug crawling on a blade of grass, or you've observed some insects very closely, when you look really close, you don't have to think anything about the insect. You don't even have to know what kind of insect it is. You don't have to judge it and say, oh, he's probably going to get food, or you don't have to overlay some kind of story onto it. You can just look at what it is and what it's doing. And just by looking, you learn. Just by observing what it is, you understand its nature, its motivations, what it does. I remember the other day I spent like 45 minutes just looking at a ladybug crawl on the blade of grass. And I learned so much about the nature of the ladybug, its visual capacity. Ladybugs don't have very good vision. The way it moves around its environment, it uses its feelers and kind of feels for other blades of grass that are nearby. And then if it feels one, it kind of latches onto it and then crawls onto that one. But I noticed if the ladybug doesn't feel any blades of grass in its vicinity, it turns around on the blade of grass and then goes back to where it came and then tries to find a different blade of grass. So for 45 minutes, I just observed very quietly, just trying to understand what is a ladybug and how does it work. So I didn't need a biology textbook to teach me about that. That might be helpful, actually. That might be helpful for learning the parts of a ladybug, but to understand the nature of a ladybug, I could read a whole book about ladybug behavior. And I would probably learn a lot of stuff because that came from someone who spent 20 years observing ladybugs. But if I really want to learn about a ladybug intimately, eventually I need to actually go see one. I need to actually experience one for myself. If I have never tasted authentic Italian spaghetti and meatballs, if I've never authentically tasted that food, I'm very lucky to have because I'm Italian, it doesn't matter if I read a whole book about how spaghetti and meatballs tastes or the history of spaghetti and meatballs. At the end of I could read that whole fucking book, and at the end of the day, I still won't have a clue about how spaghetti and meatballs, authentic spaghetti and meatballs, actually tastes. So mysticism is just the realization that you can only know reality by experiencing reality. You can only know reality directly because your direct experience is the only thing that you have. It's the only thing. There's nothing else. There's just your experience and then your thoughts about your experience. And the thoughts are often very wrong, but the experience itself is rarely wrong because the experience itself is. So you might say, well, Adam, what about people who have schizophrenia and they see things that aren't there, or they have psychosis and they see, like, animals running around, but they're not actually there? Yeah, it is possible to see things that aren't there. Yeah, sure, your senses can deceive you. But even when your senses are deceiving you, the fact that they are deceiving you is still part of your senses, and it still is the truth. So the deception itself is part of the truth. It's true that you're being deceived by your senses. So when you're seeing an imaginary dog running around because you have had brain trauma, or maybe you have Alzheimer's or something like that, and you have psychosis, even though you're seeing an imaginary dog, that's still true. The dog itself might not be physical, but the fact that you're seeing it is real. So mysticism investigates reality directly using practices that sharpen our awareness, boost our mindfulness, and our concentration. So practices like contemplation, meditation, breathwork, yoga, psychedelics, concentration meditation, mindfulness meditation, these practices are, the purpose of these practices is to expand your consciousness, to sharpen your awareness so that you can cut deeper into reality. So my meditation teacher would say that concentration meditation is like sharpening your knife. You need your knife to be nice and sharp. And then vipassana meditation, or insight meditation, which is a little different than samatha, which is concentration meditation, is actually cutting into reality, cutting into experience to actually break it apart into fine little distinctions, to understand it directly. So concentration sharpens the knife, vipassana, insight, cuts into the experience to see what it is. That's really the spirit of mysticism. We just want to know what experience is. It's a fair want. Okay, if you want to know, I don't know why you wouldn't want to know what experience is. It's all there is. I just want to know what it is. I want to know what existence is. That's the spirit of mysticism. It's the spirit of science too, so we don't have to pit mysticism against science. Ideally, we can get mysticism and science to work together, which is the point of this video, why mysticism makes logical sense. Also, mystical thinking has a deep desire for union with the source of creation, with God, with the infinite, or with the absolute, with love. Whatever you want to call God, doesn't matter the name that you give it, it's all pointing to the same oneness, the same, just reality itself, the source of reality. Again, ask yourself, why is reality here at all? There's just spontaneously forms that are just appearing and disappearing all by themselves. That's kind of miraculous. And really what we want is to have a deep union and connection to this source. We want to see the source of creation in action. And we want to eliminate separation and selfish consciousness, ego consciousness. Not that we want to eliminate it, but we want to transcend it and go beyond it. Because after all, you are within your own mind. You are your mind. The mind can't grasp itself. It stands apart from reality, but at the same time, it is reality. So we're trying to become one with reality by realizing that my mind actually is what reality is, which is a little bit freaky and weird. Also, mysticism sees everything in reality as perfection. Absolute perfection. Meaning that regardless of if you like the thing or not, or if it's perfect to you, or if you think it's evil or bad, mysticism sees the perfection in all experience and all things, all people. Even the evil and bad ones that you call evil and bad, your goal as a mystic is to ask yourself, why does this exist? Why did God create this? Did God make a mistake? And again, when I say God, I'm not speaking about the religious God. I'm speaking about the trans-rational God, which includes all possible notions of God from all religions and perspectives. I'm talking about actual God, which is reality. But the reason why God is a good word is because God gives the universe a kind of personal quality. And that's important because when New Agers will say, oh, the universe is talking to me, the problem with the universe is that the universe seems so impersonal. When I hear the word universe, I think of like stars and galaxies and matter and black holes and stuff and planets. But when I think of God, I think of a person. And the nature of reality, the creator has intelligence. It has human qualities, not in the way it looks, but it has love, it has will, it has intention. It has logic, it has its own reason, it has intelligence, like I said. It has love. It is love. So that's why I like the word God, and mysticism is about realizing that you are God. Now, the scientific person might say, what do you mean I am God? Think about it. Just like think about it. If God is everything and you are part of everything, by definition, you're God. And then you might say, but Adam, why do we have to use that word, God is everything? Well, when you have direct experience of the nature of reality, maybe you can do some psychedelics. Maybe you can go on a meditation retreat. Maybe you can just contemplate it for yourself. Maybe you can read some spiritual scriptures. But if you actually have the contemplative interest to actually investigate the nature of reality, you'll see like it has to be God. It has to be divine. And I have to be part of that. So mystical thinking, we're doing philosophy. We're asking really big, lofty questions, but we're not doing armchair philosophy where we're just speculating and theorizing, but we're doing applied philosophy where I ask a question and then I actually go after the answer in my experience. I actually care about answering it. I don't just think about it and, chat about it with my friends. I actually investigate it. So seeing everything as perfection, God doesn't make mistakes. It's an infinite intelligence. So your job as the mystic is to see the perfection in the things that you don't like. For example, the other night I was falling asleep and this Amber Alert went off on my phone. My phone was on my desk, and the government in Ontario does like this Amber Alert where like if they need, like, it's like an urgent emergency announcement, usually if a child goes missing, they ping every single person's phone in the entire province, or at least in the local area, And it's this really loud, like obnoxious noise. It's like like loud, like full volume. Even if my phone was on do not disturb, it bypasses that and just gives a super loud noise as I'm falling asleep at night. So that was very frustrating because it actually woke me up, and not only does it go off once, it goes off 3 separate times in 10-minute intervals. So every 10 minutes is just a really loud, annoying alarm sound while I'm trying to fall asleep, whether I like it or not. So that's a terrible system, but I was very annoyed. I was like, damn, like why? Like I'm trying to fall asleep. I got to wake up early tomorrow. Why is that happening? I was mad. And it woke me up, and then I actually couldn't fall back asleep for another hour or two. But then within that time where I was lying in bed by myself, I actually had a fantastic insight for my coaching program, for my business. And I had just this spontaneous download of like all of the information that I needed just came to me all at once. And it was amazing. It was like all the pieces that I was trying to kind of juggle in my mind, all of them fit together for where I'm taking my business next and where I'm taking this YouTube channel next. And it just all came at once spontaneously as I was lying in my bed. And then after it happened, I was so happy. I was actually so excited I couldn't even sleep for another hour afterwards because everything just fit together. It was miraculous. This was a spontaneous insight. I didn't really logic my way into this. It was a mix of left brain and right brain. But then I realized, wait, if that Amber Alert hadn't went off, that stupid Amber Alert, then I wouldn't have had that magical insight. So this kind of allowed me to see the perfection in the things that seem imperfect on the surface. It was actually perfectly aligned the whole time. So your job as the mystic is to see the perfection in the imperfect. The mysticism also embraces the world and all that it has to offer. Many people think of mysticism as asceticism, where it's like running away to go hide in a cave and never talking to anyone and growing a long beard and eating bugs. This practice of retreat can be very useful and can very fast track you in your spiritual growth. But mysticism is not only about retreat and asceticism, although that's important, but also it's about embracing the world and living in the world, being a part of the world and enjoying all the beauty and magnificence that the world has to offer, and participating in the world and sharing your passion and your gift with the world and assisting humans, helping them to live happy lives. That's real mysticism. It's not just sitting in a cave on the mountaintop. That's cool and that's good. But the mystic, the true mystic, always eventually comes back down from the mountain to share all that they've learned. Mysticism has a reverence and an honor for all experience, seeing every single form as the face of God. I've had enlightenment experiences where I see a disgusting like piece of shit on the road, like dog shit, and realizing, oh my God, this is God. It's divine shit. That gives another whole new meaning to the phrase holy shit. Also, mystics have detachment and playfulness as well. They're not so attached to the game of life. They're able to kind of zoom out and take a big picture perspective and let go and just be playful and just joke around. This is very important. In the Hindu tradition, there's this concept called Leela. I love this concept. Leela is this idea that the reason why Brahma, which is God, the reason why Brahma created the world was just for a divine play, just for fun. Because if Brahma created the world for a reason, then that would imply that Brahma is lacking something, that God is not infinite. It would imply that God needs to have a reason to create the world. But Leela, this concept, says no, God just created the world spontaneously out of its own nature. In the same way where puppies play with each other. They bite each other and they chase each other around. They don't have a reason to. They just do it because it's fun to be a puppy and to play with the other puppies. So the mystic is connected to playfulness. Also, the mystic is open to intuition as well. They're open to receiving insight about reality without having to get it from some kind of logical source. My girlfriend does a fantastic job of this. She's a professional tarot reader, and she's an excellent one. And she is able to get insight about reality in the same way like an oracle would, just by seeing something. So she'll be talking about something, and then a hawk will fly over her, and then the hawk, she'll hear something in her ear. It'll be like a sentence, and then she'll like get a meaning. It was like a guide or an angel that gave her a message. And yeah, angels and guides actually exist, but well, that's for a different episode. Mystics they embrace relativism and subjectivism. They know that reality is relative and it all depends on the perspective from which you're looking. There's no such thing as an objective material world. The only thing that is objective, that never changes, the only thing that's absolutely true is subjectivity. Absolute subjectivity. There's only subject, only mind, only God. God is the only subject. You're just looking at yourself. God is the observer and the object that's observed. And as Schrödinger said, there is no difference. Mysticism has this quality of groundlessness. They embrace the idea of groundlessness. So scientifically minded people, or even religiously minded people, or any people, they always want to create a ground for reality. They need to ground their ideas in something. So if I have a belief about the government, I need to ground that belief in something solid. Or if I have a belief about the Big Bang or about the creation of reality, I need to have some kind of evidence or proof or ground for my claim. But the mystics realize that reality is ultimately groundless. If you just kind of look at your experience right now, where is the ground? And I'm not saying where is the ground like the floor. I'm saying what is the substance of your experience? What is it grounded in? Is there anything that's like holding your experience in place, making it solid? Or is it just kind of like a flow? Just like a flow of experiences. There's no ground to your experience. It's just... Buddhists say it's like ghosts, or it's like a mirage. It's groundless. Also, mysticism embraces the idea of flow. And the mystics are able to flow with experience. So when I say experience is a flow, it's like the way to live is always changing. The path is always changing. So I was reading the Zen teaching of Huang Po, fantastic book, and one of the questioners asked Huang Po, "What is the Dharma and how should I live it?" And the Dharma is another word for the way. What is the way and how shall it be followed? And Huang Po, the Zen master, responded, "What sort of thing do you think that the way is so that you can follow it?" And the questioner says, "Well, I just want to know like the instructions for like how to practice the Dharma. What are the best ways to do meditation?" And the Huang Po said, "All of that is instructions for stupid people." And the questioner was like, "Well, if all the Dharma that I've ever heard is instructions for stupid people, I would love to hear a Dharma that smart people follow or intelligent people." And Huang Po said, "Intelligent people don't need to follow a Dharma because their experience itself shows them the way. The way is in their own experience. They don't need a way to follow from somebody else. They don't need another person's dharma. They follow the dharma of the moment. The moment itself reveals the way to the intelligent person." So that's a very mystical idea, but it's true. You don't need to rely on another person's way or another person's teaching. Find your own way by being present in the moment. And whenever we become too rigid or systematic with our behavior, when we become too schedule oriented, when we're too rigid and systematic, reality has a way to kind of break that apart. Because the way to live on Monday is completely different than the way to live on Tuesday. So this is like the ever shifting balance of life. There's this constant interplay of like, how much should I work versus how much should I rest? It's like that saying from Ecclesiastes, there's a time to reap and a time to sow. A time to laugh and a time to be serious. There's a time, everything in its season. So reality itself is structured in such a way where I can't give you the Dharma. I can't give you the path to follow because there is no path. But even though there is no path, only a fool doesn't walk it. So the path itself is the pathless path. It's a contradiction. It's a paradox. That's how it's supposed to be. And mystical thinking embraces paradox. So logical scientific thinking hates paradox, is allergic to paradox. But as Gödel proved, that paradox is actually an inherent quality of reality. And Douglas Hofstadter talks a lot more about this concept in his book, Gödel, Escher, Bach, which is a masterpiece. I'm reading it now and I'm really enjoying it. Reality necessarily must contradict itself because reality is one, whenever it tries to self-reference itself, whenever it tries to grab a hold of itself or explain itself, something weird happens and it just kind of breaks. So for example, if a sentence self-references itself, it can create a logical paradox. So for example, if I were to say, this sentence is false, is that sentence true or is it false? This sentence is false. So if you say it's true, then that would mean it's false. But if it's false, then that would mean that what it said is true. So it's both true and false, and neither true or false. And it's true and it's false. So it's a paradox. It breaks. And this is what Gödel actually did in math. He created a mathematical formula that he turned math into a language so that math could actually talk about itself. And he wrote the sentence in math, "This statement cannot be proven." And then that's what caused everything to break. Or whenever something references itself, it creates paradoxes. So even like if a genie grants you 3 wishes, if you're very clever, you'll wish, "I wish that none of my wishes will be granted." Can your genie grant that wish? He'll probably get mad at you and go back into the lamp. So mystical thinking embraces paradox, and it also embraces compassion for others as well. Because we realize oneness, we also naturally, spontaneously feel compassion for others. And I have a whole video about compassion called Understanding Compassion. It's another good one. You can check that out. Also, mysticism integrates the left brain and the right brain. It integrates common sense and logic. This is why mysticism is trans-rational as opposed to pre-rational. Religious people aren't able to use rationality. They can't even think rationally, which is why they have so many irrational beliefs. But on the surface, mystical beliefs might seem irrational or pre-rational, but actually they're irrational, meaning they have nothing to do with rationality, or they have their own rationality. So when we're talking about logic, what I'm saying makes logical sense. But there's actually, which logic are you using? There's many different types of logics. Some logics are more comprehensive and complete than other logics, and some logics work in some circumstances than another logics work in other circumstances. So for example, in geometry, there's actually different types of geometries. Depending on which axioms that you choose for your geometry, it actually creates completely different geometric systems that work in different contexts. So when we're trying to measure the diameter of a circle on a flat 2D plane, then we need to use Euclidean geometry, which has its own set of axioms. But if we're trying to measure the curvature of space-time, then we need to use non-Euclidean geometry and its axioms. So in the same way, when we're asking questions of reality, we need to use different logics for different scenarios. There's no such thing as the ultimate logic. Every scenario has its own logic. So for example, recently I've been learning a lot about the existence of angels and demons and spirits and astral entities, and also the existence of other realms of being. So heavenly realms and also hell realms. There is tons of evidence in every single mystical tradition, and I'm talking about every single mystical tradition. They almost all have this idea of heaven realms and hell realms. It's all there, even in Buddhism and in even the Viking religions and shamanistic religions and even in occult religions. This idea of heaven and hell is ubiquitous. So it would kind of make sense to investigate more deeply into why do all these religions believe in heaven and hell. Maybe there might be some overlap there. Maybe heaven and hell can actually be accessed. Actual realms of being can actually be accessed by changing your state of consciousness. So you probably can't take a car to hell unless you want to go to like New Jersey or something. I'm just kidding. But you can't take a car, you can't drive to hell, but you can go to hell by having a very low state of consciousness. Same with heaven. And there's actually many tiers and levels and degrees of heaven. And then there's this its own kind of logic. It's like a mystical logic. And it works. It's self-consistent. It has its own axioms. So there's a book I'm reading. It's called Levels of Energy. I just finished reading it. Now I moved on to Levels of Heaven and Hell. They're by Frederick Dodson. They're fantastic. I highly recommend if you're interested in this topic. But the logic he uses is a very stage turquoise, trans-rational kind of logic, and it makes perfect sense. He expands my worldview in such a way that now I can actually logically comprehend how reality could include the existence of angels and demons and other astral entities all in between. And really the point of I guess being an intelligent person and understanding reality is we want to have a worldview that includes every possible experience. The problem with science is that if I start talking about angels and demons, their worldview can't even include that. The only way their worldview includes that is by rejecting it and saying, oh, that's just stupid superstition. If you want to have a really high quality integral worldview, Ken Wilber famously said that every single person, every perspective has some truth. So what worldview can you build for yourself that actually integrates and makes good sense of every single perspective without having to reject it or deny it or demonize it or call it stupid or infantile? How can you understand the existence of every single worldview and integrate all of them? So mysticism integrates logic and common sense and actually realizes there's different kinds of logics that are appropriate for different scenarios. Okay, so now I'm going to continue with some of the qualities of mystical thinking, and these ones are coming from those ones that I shared with you. I just brainstormed. However, these ones I got from the Kybalion, which is kind of a rare mystical book that is it's a new age book, and it's apparently the essence of the Hermetic philosophies from ancient Greece and ancient Egypt. So the mystical branches of ancient Greece and ancient Egypt, these are the 7 principles of reality that the Kybalion puts forth. And I wanted to share this just because they're good principles, and also it's kind of a lesser known mysticism, and I think it would just be more interesting than to just always talk about like Buddhism or Hinduism or whatever. So the first principle of reality, according to the Kybalion, is mentalism, meaning that all of reality is made of mind. And we've spoken a lot about that, but really think about like what is reality. The proof for why reality must be made of mind and be made of consciousness is the dream proof. When you dream at night, your mind and your consciousness creates entire self-consistent realities that have solid physical objects and other people and stories and entire worlds. But your mind does that whole thing while you're sleeping at night. So if your mind can create an entire world automatically without you even knowing that it's doing it, because when you're in the dream, you're not aware that you're in the dream. You're just kind of going along with whatever crazy story is being told. And you don't question anything. Sometimes I have crazy dreams and I just kind of go with it. Unless I lucid dream. So if my mind can create a whole fictional reality and then trick itself into forgetting that it is the one that's creating this reality, then why can't my mind do the same with the waking reality? I talk a lot about this in my video, How to Lucid Dream While You're Awake. Mentalism, reality's made of mind. It's one infinite mind. It's God's mind. Also, the principle of correspondence. As above, so below. This is a very profound idea. And since reality is all one, we can see certain patterns that are dispersed throughout every single layer of reality. So, for example, the way a galaxy looks, like the fractal shape of a galaxy, is the same nature as the way a river system looks when you zoom out, or the way a cauliflower looks. So the fractal is a common thread that you can find throughout nature. The entire natural world is made of fractals. And then you can go deeper into investigating what is a fractal and how does it work, which I haven't done yet. Actually, I'm looking more into that. So as above, so below. Also, another way to interpret this is the law of attraction. So as you feel in your imagination, so it is in your actual reality. As in heaven, so on earth. Our Father, no, never mind. Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. That's it. So as you imagine in heaven, so in your mind, as you in your imagination, as you imagine your life to be, that's how it ends up being. So if you look around and you see how your life is, that is a reflection of how you've been thinking about your life up until now. And it's possible to change your life by changing your thinking about yourself. As above, so below. It has to be like this because reality is your mind. So people might say, but they get skeptical when they think about law of attraction. Like, Adam, I'm just going to imagine a different reality and then I'm going to create a new world for myself, or I'm going to imagine a new scenario for myself. How does that even work? Because your thoughts and the energy that you embody, that you put out into the world, determines what the world gives back to you. It's like when you hold in your mind the thought that somebody is an asshole. Try this as an experiment. Think about someone that you know, maybe a friend of yours, and the next time you meet them, think about how much of an asshole they are and see how they respond to you. They might start being a little bit more of an asshole to you because you're giving that energy off to them and they're reflecting it back. But if you think that they're the nicest, coolest, kindest, most interesting person in the world, then they're going to be more of that to you because that's what you're giving them. And the same is true for the energy that you give the world. The world gives you more of what you give it, what you think of it. As above, so below. Next, the third principle of reality, according to the Kabbalion, is the principle of vibration, which means that reality is always vibrating, always moving, never still, never stagnant. The Buddhists call this impermanence. So reality is always flowing and moving and changing. I think Heraclitus said the only permanent thing is change. I don't know if it was Heraclitus, but it was somebody, one of the Greeks. They said the only permanent thing is change and movement and flow. Because reality is made of energy. Energy doesn't exist unless it has potential, unless it's in motion. If it's stagnant, it just ceases, which is okay, but everything that exists, to exist literally means to be in motion. Because if you're not in motion, you don't exist. So even at the scientific level, you can observe the particles, they're always vibrating. Because to not be in motion is to not exist, which is, you could say, like the witness, the empty space is what allows the forms to exist within it. All right, so the fourth principle of reality, according to the Kabbalion, is the principle of polarity, or also known as duality. So every single thing that exists also has its opposite. So whenever you label something in reality as being hot or cold, like, oh wow, this stove is hot. That when you say that something's hot, that also creates its opposite, cold. But the thing with duality is that duality only exists on the surface if you don't go too deeply into it. Because if you really, really investigate duality, opposites like good versus evil, tall versus short. Why can't I think of other ones? Hairy versus smooth. Awake versus asleep. Night versus day. Up versus down. You might think, Adam, up and down, how does that collapse? Right? Because I'm saying that if you investigate dualities deeply, they always show that they're not real, that they collapse. They only work in relative finite scenarios. Up and down only works if you're on a 2D plane. But when you realize you're on a globe, up and down is relative. What's up for me is down for the person that is in China right now on the other side of the earth as I'm recording this in Canada. So up and down is relative. Or if you're in the vacuum of empty space, where is up and where is down? You might say, well, Adam, but then what about hot and cold? Well, hot and cold, is that not just different degradations of heat? Degradations of heat? And it's always relative. If I just got out of Antarctica and I come spend some time in Canada, I might think, damn, it's super hot. But it's winter right now, and if I just came from Costa Rica and then I come back to Canada, I might say, oh damn, it's actually really cold. So it's relative. It depends on what you're comparing it to. And that's how all dualities work. That's how reality is made. It's made through distinction. We make distinctions. We separate things apart. But all of this separation, it's creative, right? So holy fuck, I just had a big insight. So I learned stuff too, guys, in these videos. So a fractal, what is a fractal? A fractal is just a series of branching patterns. So if you look at a tree fractal, it's one that branches into two, that also branches, and it just like branches infinitely. So that's what creation is. It's the branching of oneness into two-ness. And that's what creates. So there's nothing wrong with duality. Duality isn't bad. That's actually the engine of creation. It's infinite. It can branch, because every time you make a duality, you can make another duality, and then another duality. It's like a number. The number one, you can split it an infinite number of times. There's an infinite number of decimal points in between 0 and 1. Imagine that infinity is literally in between 0 and 1. So this is mystical thinking, but see how it makes sense. It makes logical sense. Also, the fifth principle of mystical thinking is the rhythm, the rise and fall of life. And I talked a little bit about this when I was talking about the seasons, where there's a time and place to work, a time and place to rest. When I was on a meditation retreat, I was doing Vipassana meditation, and I was observing the rise and fall of the belly. I teach this practice actually in a free training, which you can click the first link in the description. I'll show you how to do this meditation, where we just observe mindfully the rising and falling of the belly. And we do this for hundreds of hours until it sharpens our concentration and we can see the nature of reality. So on the fourth or fifth day of my retreat, I was kind of cutting into the nature of what is the rising sensation, what is the falling sensation. And this didn't happen while I was meditating, but actually as I was walking in the forest after one of my meditation sessions, I kind of realized all at once that all of reality is rising and falling. Because reality is made of vibration. And what is vibration? Vibration is a wave of up and down, rising and falling. The polarity of opposites, up and down. So reality also has this rhythm and this flow, and the sage knows when to rise with reality and then when to fall with reality, when to exert effort and then when to rest, when to study more theory and then when to put it into practice. And I'll have a whole episode about balance. All right, so the sixth principle of the Kabbalion, of all of reality, is the principle of cause and effect. Every effect has a cause, and then every cause is an effect of another cause. And this kind of goes into the idea of karma, right? So karma means that when you take an action, it has an effect. But advanced understandings of karma realize that the like a childish understanding of karma would be like, you let your dog poop on somebody's lawn, and then a year later someone else's dog poops on your lawn, and like that's your karma. But that's not really what karma means. Karma means fruit. And it's like every action you take is its own fruit. I don't know if karma means fruit. A teacher told me that, so I'm gonna take his word for it. But it's like every action you take is its own fruit. That's why the Dalai Lama said that you're not punished for your anger, you're punished by your anger. So cause and effect aren't seen as linear, but they're seen as kind of intertangled and enmeshed with itself. And also, what's interesting is to think about cause and effect. Like, what is the cause of the universe? Scientists would say it's the Big Bang. Religious people will say it's God. And so on. But what about this idea of cyclical causation, which is really twisted and really wacky? But what if the universe created itself? And what if you can affect the past by acting in the present? What if the action that you take in the present changes the past? And the past, we can kind of see how that could affect the future because of linear time. But when we realize that time is not linear, what if a past event can affect the future? I've been exploring this idea of reincarnation, which I think has a lot of credibility to it. And I'm always surprised when people I was surprised when I realized that you can reincarnate into the past. Right? So maybe let's say I'll die and then I'll reincarnate as a Chinese girl who lives in the year 700. How is that possible, you might ask? Well, time is made up. It's like a YouTube video. If you want, you can like just scrub back 10 minutes into this video and then go back to when I was talking about like vibration or something. So in a weird way, it's like God can like scrub back to like go back to like the Chinese girl. But then it gets even weirder than that. So imagine if I could say something now that actually changes what I said 20 minutes ago. That I don't think can happen in the video, but it could happen in reality. There's this weird idea of it's a law of attraction idea where a coach was telling me that when I succeed, when I, let's say, make a lot of money in my business, then the way that I celebrate actually determines the likelihood of it happening in the past. So if I celebrate and I'm like so excited and I like make a giant deal out of it and I like overcompensate, then it might be less likely to happen in the past. And it might be less likely to happen again for me in the future. But when I celebrate, if I'm very natural about it and I'm respectful about it, then it'll actually help out my past self. It's such a twisted, wacky concept, but why not? Can you give me a reason why it wouldn't work like that? That's my challenge for you. All right. So the last principle that I'm going to be sharing with you of mystical thinking, according to the Kabbalion, is the principle of gender. Everything has its masculine and feminine poles. This is very important. It's a very deep principle. I'm not just talking about man and woman. I'm talking about these deeper, fundamental masculine and feminine energies. These energies actually, when they come together, that's what creates reality. The masculine energy has certain qualities like emptiness, like awareness, like strength and indestructibility, like destruction as well, like penetration, to be able to see through something. And then the feminine qualities, this is like the yin yang. The yin, which is the feminine, has these qualities of flow, beauty, form, expression, compassion, love, creation, fullness, whereas the masculine would be more about emptiness and destruction. And both of these are actually, they're part of the same energy, because in order to create something, there needs to be empty space for it to exist. So the masculine is the empty space, the awareness, and then the feminine is the form that occurs in the awareness. You can think of it like if you're walking through a forest, the person who sees the forest, that's the masculine, and then the forest, the beauty of the forest itself, and the forms and the chirping of the birds and the smell of the pine trees, that's the feminine. And when these two things come together, that's what creates reality. Because you can't have a forest without somebody observing the forest. See, we're back on the subject-object concept. You can't have a forest without somebody observing the forest. And you can't have an observer without something for the observer to observe. Otherwise, it's just nothingness. There is no observer if there's nothing for the observer to observe. So this is how creation is actually made. It's made through this subject-object duality and this kind of deep interplay between masculine and feminine energy. That's what creates reality. On the physical level, on the sexual level, on the mental level, and even on the spiritual level as well. All right, so how do you study and practice mysticism for yourself? Well, I've spoken a lot about that on my channel. Generally, you just need to be doing spiritual practices like meditation, contemplation, yoga, psychedelics, and you need to genuinely care about the nature of reality. What helps, I find, with doing mysticism is solving your basic needs. So first figure out like how to get a date or how to make some money. Then maybe it would be best for you to go deeper into mysticism. However, in my personal experience, I've found that increasing my mystical understanding of reality has actually made it infinitely easier for me to get dates, even though I have a girlfriend now. But I have whole videos about how spiritual awakening makes you more attractive, and also helps me with money as well, because it helps me not be so needy, and it helps me bring amazing value to my clients. So to study and practice mysticism for yourself, you read all the various schools and theories, and you really have to learn about it first. There's no skipping that school. There's no skipping that step. And then you implement the practices and you contemplate for yourself as well. So you read the books, but then you also at some point need to throw the books away and just act on the principles, which are the principles of trying to understand reality directly, with an open mind, without assumptions, using observation. And also follow along with this channel, because in the future I'm going to be making more videos about how to reach into the highest levels of human development. That's what I'm interested in helping you do here on this channel. If you recall that rainbow I showed you at the beginning of the video, those are the stages of ego development. And I'll have a whole series about what ego development is, how it works, how you can reach into the highest levels of development where life really becomes deeply fulfilling and deeply meaningful. I personally feel that life actually begins when we actually move into the trans-rational levels of understanding. That's where like the compounding interest starts to accumulate. Life becomes more fulfilling the more work that you put into your life, the more that you grow yourself proactively with self-actualization, which is all I talk about on this channel. The more compound interest you're going to reap in your understanding of life and also just your fulfillment over the next 5-10 years, over the long term. The better life gets, the better life gets, and it can get infinitely good. I don't think there's a limit to how good life can get. It can get infinitely good, and I want to help guide you towards that, mainly by assisting you in your own self-actualization, helping you to do practical, grounded personal development like dating, money, business, life purpose, emotions, that kind of stuff, but then also guiding you towards the higher levels of development, which is a lot about what we talked about here: mysticism, understanding the nature of reality. So if you want to join my community, I have a free school community where it's called the Self-Actualizer Academy. You can click the first link in the description to join. I'm building a community with people. We're sharing resources. We're supporting each other. We're helping each other along this path. We're giving each other accompaniment. And I'm also sharing resources and great articles for self-actualization in that free community group. It's really awesome. Come check it out. And otherwise, subscribe to the channel. I make new videos like this every single Sunday. And follow along with me. Do I have anything else to say? Hope you like this video. I'll see you in the next one.